Good morning, everyone. Come on, you can do better than that. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
That's right, Hood. This is the Army. We got to get fired up. Day 2 of our Contemporary Military Forums. I'm Lieutenant General Smith, AUSA's Vice President of Leadership and Education. As your professional association, the Association of the United States Army is proud to provide forums like this one throughout the year that broaden the knowledge base on Army professionals and those who support our Army. AUSA will amplify the U.S. Army's narrative to audiences inside the Army and help further the Association's mission to be the voice for the Army and support for soldiers. Of course, we can't do this alone. AUSA relies on its members to help tell the Army story and to support soldiers and their families. A strong membership base is vitally important for our advocacy efforts in Congress, and we just went over 1 million members a few months ago. The Pentagon and the Defense Industrial Base, and to the public through communities across the United States with AUSA's 122 chapters within the United States and 9 other countries. Thank you for your continued support. Now, for our speakers, we do have a gift. Sir, it's less than $25. You remember what my last job was? Right. I want to keep you out of trouble. So on behalf of General Brown, AUSA's President, CEO, and the rest of the AUSA team, please accept this small token of appreciation for your time. Now I will turn it over to our moderator, Ms. Jennifer Swanson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Army for Data, Engineering, and Software. Let's give her a round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I am very, very excited to be moderating Honorable Camarillo's Digital Transformation Panel. And I think you guys are going to learn some great stuff that the Army's been doing. So we're going to start with introducing our panel members. I will start. So each panel member, if you could just introduce yourself and just talk for like a minute about what your role is in the Army's digital transformation. So Leo Garciga, we will start with you.
I thought I was going to be the last one because I'm sitting over here, but thank you, and I appreciate that. I'm Leo Garciga. I'm the Chief Information Officer of the Army. I've been at this for a couple of weeks now, almost 3 months. Super excited to be here, and really, my function in the Army is to really grease the skids on digital transformation, right? Focus on making sure that we get the policy right, the guidance right, and the resourcing right to make sure that we can move as fast as we're trying to move right now and scale out our digital transformation.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bang.
Morning, everyone. I'm Young Bang. I'm the Principal Deputy for ASALT, and my role here is really to help the Army modernization, and I always say that's underpinned by digital transformation. And so working with our colleagues like Leo and supporting the under, my role is really, I think some of you have already heard me talk about it, I always kin myself as the Army's largest Scrum Master. So any type of obstacles that we run into from an enterprise perspective around digital transformation, we try to identify, work with the right appropriate authorities to try to change policy to really enable faster transformation. So that's my role. I'm excited to be here, and let us know your hard questions, because if you have them, I'll give them all to Leo.
All right, Margie Palmieri.
Yeah, good morning. Margie Palmieri. So I'm not from the Army, the dark side of OSD, in the Chief Digital and AI Office. We're a new office. We stood up last June, as a direct report to the Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary, focused on accelerating DoD's adoption of data analytics and artificial intelligence. Really excited to be here on the digital transformation panel. The Army's doing incredible work in this space. DoD's been on a digital transformation journey for about 8 years or so, in different pockets in the services inside of the department. And it's really exciting to see the lessons that we've learned, the best practices that we found, the worst practices that we found, really have seen buy-in and momentum grow in this space over the last 8 years. And the stand-up of the CDAO was really to recognize that now's the time to start to scale and accelerate this change across the department. So we're focused on really 3 areas, all of which integrate with the services and the other components of DoD. The first First one is quality data. So we can't do digital transformation and data analytics or AI without quality data. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that and enabling that across the department. The second one is on the analytics side. How do we get better data-driven decisions across the department? And this spans from the boardroom to the battlefield, as we like to say. On the boardroom side, it's about the strategic management of the department and our business objectives and how we enable that through data and analytics. And on the warfighting side, it's in combined joint all-domain command and control. And how do we, in CDAO, put in place the interoperability mechanisms and the right data access and exchanges to really harness what the work that the services have been doing in multi-domain operations and in joint kill chains for the last few years. The last piece is on artificial intelligence. As part of CDAO, the department combined predecessor organizations together. Two of those were the Joint AI Center, or the JAIC, and Project Maven's non-GEOINT capabilities. We've leveraged both of those. Instead of doing the AI out of CDAO, we're really looking at enabling AI/ML scaffolding, the data labeling, the test and evaluation, the model monitoring, and the things that will give our operators justified confidence in using AI as a core capability. And so those are our focus areas, all of which I know we'll talk more about on the panel today and are key to what the Army's doing as it goes forward. Thanks.
All right, excellent, thank you. And Karen Dayhut.
Well, good morning. It's certainly a privileged position to be up here representing industry with this distinguished panel, so thank you for that. Karen Dayhut, and I am the CEO of Google Public Sector. And so Google has been doing work for the department since about 2008, halfway through our history. But a year ago, we recognized the importance of really supporting the mission. And so we established Google Public Sector with an independent board chaired by Dave Goldfein, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, to really enable us to not only deliver Google technology to the department, but to support the mission by building unique technologies. I think it's also in recognition that the defense industrial base is changing. There is no single technology today that isn't really largely in use across the department. And so having Google and independent software vendors and companies like Apple be representative in that defense industrial base is super important. And as Secretary Camarillo said, you know, this is a team sport, and we're really happy to be on the team.
Excellent, thank you, Karen. So one quick admin note, and then, sir, I'm going to turn it over to you for some opening remarks. So there's people going around with cards for questions, so that's how we're going to do questions. If you have a question, just take a card, fill it out, and then those will be handed up here during the question and answer session, and we'll go through those. Thanks. All right, Honorable Camarillo, over to you, sir.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Given the size of this particular audience, I know that so many people think that this is an important topic of conversation. Honestly, digital transformation was one of the areas I was most excited about taking on when I returned to public service and had the honor of serving as undersecretary. So this is great to be able to have this conversation with everybody. I do want to thank AUSA for putting this together as one of our CMF panels. I think it shows the importance of digital transformation to the Army and to the broader DoD. So I think kind of to frame the conversation today, what I thought I would do is just make a couple of quick points to help kind of guide the discussion, I think, as Jen and the rest of the team engage with all of you today. And I think the first point I would make is something that Margie talked about a few minutes ago. We've been about 8 years into a journey to digitally transform the way the department does business in a multitude of areas. And I think what I would observe, especially when I was not back in government, when I was on the outside, was how much the conversation was just within DoD and in the Army specifically about trying to catch up with where the private sector already was. That's a strange position for DoD and for the military services to be in. We have historically always been, as you all know, technology leaders. We are the ones that are not the late adopters to new capabilities. But that's not the case in this space. The second observation I would make is, really in order for us to succeed, the challenges aren't really technical. I mean, because industry, the private sector, most of this stuff is figured out. The real question is how quickly can we adopt and change our processes to make the most advantageous use of capabilities that are already extant today in the market. That is an institutional more than a technical challenge. And that's really what excited me about coming back into this role. Why do we do it? Why is it so important? I think there's a multitude of reasons, and we could probably spend a couple hours talking about it, but two really stick out for me. The first, we are, as our national defense strategy says, very much in a competition to maintain our technological superiority over potential adversaries, to include our pacing challenge, the PRC. So much of what we do involves software, involves data. It's going to impact every one of the entire range and spectrum of military operations in the future. So in order for us to maintain that advantage, we absolutely, as an imperative, have to get this right. And the second reason it's so important is our ability to attract and maintain and retain talent. Now, I'm not just talking about the technical talent like the people sitting to my left that make me look good. We're talking about everybody, whether you're a soldier, civilian, anybody who's associated with the Department of Defense, whether you're somebody who is attracted to working on high-end technical challenges, or somebody who wants to make sure you have easy, intuitive tools to be able to do your everyday job, or somebody who just wants their laptop and their network to work effectively. All of those things will impact our ability to retain talent, so it's absolutely crucial that we get this right. And I think the last point I'll make is, coming into this job, I wanted to shift, at least in the Army, the conversation to one of focus on enablers to success. You know, I think for a long time, the Army had really worked on establishing pilot programs, experimenting and setting up a lot of different, trial balloons in different areas. I wanted us to focus a little bit more foundationally. What are the things that we have to do in order to accelerate our digital transformation? Part of it is going to be ensuring that, for example, we collapsed our network, which was, a variety of different networks that were kludged together into something that's more unified and more coherent. Part of it is adapting our approaches to how we develop and buy software and making use, for example, of the new acquisition authorities like the software pathway, where we now have 11 programs. And that's one good example of a head start. And then, of course, upskilling our workforce, our talent base, to make sure that we're well postured to be able to take advantage of it, and changing the way we do requirements. I could go on and on. But there are foundational things that we have to do, particularly in the areas of data, as Margie talked about, in order to enable us to get where we need to go. So I'm excited to have this conversation with all of you today, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, sir, thank you. And I just want to say I'm glad that you only mentioned the people on your left making you look good. I think that's appropriate.
I also include Jen.
Just kidding. All right, so sir, and I do want to truly thank you for your leadership and support in this digital transformation effort, because I will say we've made a lot of progress and we have a lot of accomplishments I know we're going to talk about today, but without you, that wouldn't be the case. And that's the truth. I mean that. I think it's been without your leadership to help us make the changes across the Army that are critical, all the foundational changes, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done. So thank you. Okay, so we have undertaken an effort to rapidly adopt industry best practices for software development. So, sir, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing in that area, what we've accomplished, and what's left to do?
Yeah, so Jen, with everyone on this panel's help, I think we've made some significant strides over the past year, 2 years in the area of software development that have really made a break from the way we've done things in the past, looking ahead to the future. But I think we have a lot more to do. It started when I did kind of a portfolio review of everything we were doing in the Army network to include software development. Some of the things that we found that just didn't age well anymore. First of all, the way we did requirements, grounded in an industrial-based model in which we assumed that there was a lot of specificity required in order for us to initiate most modern software development efforts. We recognized we needed to move more towards ICDs and very more generic statements of need, as opposed to the more prescriptive descriptions of requirements that would constrain our software development efforts. So we did some changes there. I think another area is, as I mentioned earlier, leveraging the new authorities to enable us to tailor the acquisition process, to do acquisition in a more CI/CD-like approach. I think we have 11 programs that are currently utilizing it, and we're looking for more. And I give you and I give Mr. Bang and Mr. Bush a great deal of credit for leading that charge within our acquisition programs. And then I think, in addition to that, looking at software sustainment. It's another example of the industrial model. we cannot assume that software ever transitions to something we just sustain. It is in constant iteration, and at the same time, we are always looking for the best of breed. So how do we adapt our institutional processes to do that is something we've begun to do in a fundamental way. But there's more to be done. And I will say that with this team up here, we are looking at developing and releasing a much more comprehensive set of software acquisition and software development policies that will fundamentally reshape the landscape for how we do it across the Army. And there's a couple of things that I'll talk about here that we're looking at in that space. One of which is making sure that we formalize and standardize the way that we do those requirements for software development programs. I talked about obviously going more to an ICD and a kind of a more generalized description. Another approach is changing the way we do test and evaluation for our software programs. There's a lot of contractor vendor testing that we can utilize, and we can train our test and evaluation workforce to utilize that without having to recreate it. And I think another one is contracting. For everybody here who's in industry or who has ever been in industry, that is where the rubber hits the road. And making sure that our contracting approaches are coherent, they are involve personnel that are well trained in software development, I think is critical to success. And then lastly, Young and I have talked about this quite a bit. It is bringing software development expertise into the Army in a way that will enable us to be much smarter, more effective, savvier consumers. And I think industry would very much appreciate that. The reality is there are way too many programs or contracts that have been let without an understanding of what we're asking for in a real sophisticated way. So we're looking at bringing in, for example, a team of experts that would red team or peer review many of the RFPs for complex software development to enable us to have a more informed approach moving forward. So in the coming weeks, I think we'll have more to say about that, but we are very excited about this approach.
Thanks, sir. And one of the things that you drove during CPR as well with the requirements process was including users from the beginning, right, to help us iterate. Absolutely. Operational users, business system users, whatever makes sense. And I think that's huge because it will really allow us to deliver what the users actually want and be able to change as we go. Based on changing requirements, as opposed to having that monolithic document that just kind of ages. So I think that's also very important. Okay, thank you. So Mr. Bang, can you talk a little bit from the acquisition perspective about some of the issues we've had with some of our software programs, but also some of the successes and how we're learning from the issues to kind of evolve our approach?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So when I first got here, I remember distinctly the under said, Young, there's 4 programs that are off the rails that you have to fix. But really, when I started looking at that, a couple of those programs really were based in the old monolithic ways of doing business. And so when you look at that, there's a couple acquisition pathways that a couple of these programs were on, the BCAC as an example. And if you look at the BCAC, as an acquisition program, it really has a waterfall approach if you think about it, right? We were trying to make it more iterative, but fundamentally it had a very thick requirements document that listed out all the details of the haves and the musts. And if you do that, that really drives industry to deliver software and programs a certain way. And so the team had actually been in the process of moving from waterfall to iterative, right? To try to get releases a little bit more than once every couple of years. And what we've been on is really a journey to shift that. One of our other partners in crime, Robin Swan right here, kind of approached us in the beginning and said, hey, there's got to be a way to do this whole BCAC process a little bit differently and faster. And so we're in the process now of giving guidance where we're going to actually make BCAC a little bit more streamlined, so it's almost basically your software pathway, and using that as a paradigm so that we can actually have business systems using the software pathway. And the significance of that is that it allows us to get away from waterfall and iterative to agile and CI/CD. And that's a first shift that we've made that actually is a lesson learned. One of the programs, IPSE, just went in, release 3, knock on wood, right? So now the Army is the world's largest PeopleSoft implementation, right? Lots of lessons learned there. But really part of that was really setting the conditions for future success. And some of that, again, like I said, was evolving that from a BCAC process, from a waterfall process, to really get to even program increment releases and planning ahead of time. And so now release 4 is now broken up from a big block of capabilities to pay, to talent management, to other things, so we can actually get capability and pay for capabilities versus just a monolithic approach. So that's one big area that I think is really critical to the Army's success, is move more to a software pathway. There are a lot of scenarios where the Under just talked about. We already have 11 programs in the software pathway. We have a lot of successes that we've done well. DCO, or the Defensive Cyber Operations, have done a lot of things extremely well, working with our cyber colleagues about how do we work on processes. Again, technology is not the hard part, it's the processes that enable us to get to releases faster. And that set us on a journey beyond just going to Agile, like the Under said, to get to CI/CD. And right now our focus is working with our colleagues like the CIO, right, and ATEC to figure out how do we get rid of these institutional processes that really forced us again back to more of an iterative process so we can get to CI/CD. So things that we're doing with the CIO around RMF and ATOs, and moving that towards continuous ATOs is going to really help us deliver faster. And working with the ATEC and the testing community to not necessarily go back and retest everything, but take a lot of the testing that we're actually automating in our process of development and taking those and by exception, right, looking through and testing what they need to, instead of, again, testing everything from soup to nuts. So a lot of successes that we're shifting, a lot of conditions that we're setting for future successes. I think that the Army is still on the journey, but you will see much more differences in PWSs that are coming out, RFPs that are coming out, to the points that were said before. There's a lot of lessons learned. We're creating templates for contracting officers to say, hey, if you have a PWS this way, you should probably be looking at schedules and deliverables and payment schedules this way, so we can actually pay for capability and functionality versus the old progress reports and design documents and those type of things. So I think industry is going to really appreciate that, because I think that's where you want to be. We're trying to work with you, but like we always say, come meet us in the middle, have that discussion with us. We try to do more industries as possible. That's your opportunity to give us feedback, again, to change the process and set the conditions for better success in our software.
That's great.
Okay, great, thank you. So as we evolve our processes that we've been talking about up here to really enable us to deliver software at the speed of need, which is critical to your point, sir, of being able to fight a near-peer adversary. That's how we're going to be able to maintain overmatch. We need to be able to also adopt and adapt and integrate new technologies as they become available from industry. And so to get there, we need a plug-and-play architecture. We need to have things not very tightly coupled. We have some very good examples, I think, of programs that have prioritized MOSA types of principles like CMOS and FLORA and FARA, but we need to be able to adapt that more broadly and adopt it more broadly. So question for you, Ms. Dayhut, what does industry need from us in order to enable broader application of plug-and-play MOSA type principles?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think you need to back up for a minute before you answer that question and look at all of the technology shifts that have happened in the last 20 years. And so you can go back 20 years and you move from mainframe to PC, PC to mobile, mobile to cloud, and now we're in another technology shift, which is AI. And what happened across all of these shifts is whole ecosystems were built up around these different platform shifts. Companies were created, business models were created, et cetera. And I think if you look at the adaptation of those technology shifts by the department has been slow to adapt and slow to move towards those new technologies. Now, there are reasons for that. There's security reasons, mission execution and the demand for perfection in those mission execution paradigms are important. You need to understand that. But the challenge is that when you start with a risk conversation, you never get to an outcome conversation. You never begin to say, justifiable confidence in this platform being able to do X for me allows me to get to an end result. So what has industry done in a similar case or circumstance? First, what large enterprise companies do is they start by saying, how do I break down my vertically integrated monolithic system so that I get real value from my data? And they create an orchestration layer. And that orchestration layer enables them to really get benefit from all of the data that they have and create the open systems that you're talking about, Jen. And so number one is I think industry would love to see the Army move to the cloud at pace. Because in the cloud, you can create open, you can create the open architecture that you need, you can create an orchestration layer, and you can get value from your data. Secondly is to really embrace open, which I know I applaud the Army for what the Army is trying to do around open architecture, open APIs. Google is a pioneer in open. We default to open on everything, and so we believe in the power of that. The second thing that industry does is they move to multi-cloud quickly. And the reason multi-cloud is important is that having a single cloud, Young and I talk about this, having a single cloud is nothing more than a different version of vendor lock-in. Have different clouds. Leverage all of the clouds that are out there because you can leverage the power of each cloud. All the clouds are different. They bring different capabilities and strengths to the table, and the Army needs to be able to leverage all of that. That will drive interoperability as well. And so I think those two things are critically important. And then lastly, I would say the value from data really starts with understanding AI. I know we're going to talk about it later with Margie, so I won't belabor the point here. But I think the power in being able to create mission effects using AI is extraordinary. But in order to get the compute power, you have to be in the cloud, which circles back to my original point. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes complete sense. And I think one of the things that we're doing to try to enable all the things that you said is building out some reference architectures. Because for us, we have to be able to align across programs. And that's if everybody does it differently, we're still not really open. And so being able to kind of align across programs so that we're able to implement things the same way is going to be, I think, important to be able to enable all the multi-cloud and orchestration layer and all the great things that you talked about. So moving on to data centricity, which you teed up for me. So data centricity is one of the Secretary's priorities. I mean, she made that clear from the start that we need to become data centric. And, you know, we haven't been, right? Because our data is really locked inside our systems. So I am going to read this because I don't want to misquote the Secretary. That would be bad. So she describes data centricity as a characteristic that empowers leaders and soldiers with the right information at the right time to gauge risk, optimize combat power, fully employ national means, and attain decision dominance at all echelons. So to that end, question for you first, Mr. Garciga. We have a few in this space. So as we work to unlock our data, what are we doing and what are we working towards to ensure that we're doing this in a secure and timely manner?
Oh boy, she said secure in this conversation. So no, I think we're doing a lot actually. So first we'll hit a technology piece, right? So one was really defining what kind of those data platforms that really we can have folks go on and be no code, low code, and just build what they needed to do their mission. I think identifying those and us really putting out kind of the guidance out to the force that's saying, hey, look, at a minimum, you can jump in on these platforms and you don't have to worry about things like ATOs, right? You don't have to worry about all the cybersecurity stuff you have to do. We trust these implicitly to be secure and work with these program managers to really get the capability you need out there, right? To reduce that burden on commands and really to give folks some capability just at any user level if they've got the skill set. So I think that was step one, right? Like really democratizing those platforms across the board. Really focused right now, I think in the, I would say business mission area probably more than anywhere else, but a good start to get folks into the environment. I think the next piece is really on the dreaded governance word, right, and policy. So kind of our first shot, folks will start seeing some of this stuff come out in industry. I know we've got a lot of support to make this happen, is to put just some basic API guidance out, right? So we talk about doing unified data reference architecture, but we've got like this step one, which is how do we make the data available and how do we make sure that our partners, right, whether on the joint force or in the DIB, have the ability to connect to our systems and share that data. So working really hard right now with the team at ASALT. Kind of our first shot has been, believe it or not, on the Intel side on getting some ready to go API guidance out, right, to let those systems talk a lot better together and fixing forward to give industry the opportunity to like coming in the door, know exactly what our expectation is. So you're gonna see a lot more work in that space right now. And I think the big one is on the training one, which is a part, just coming into this job, having had the experience on the intelligence side in the Army, and watching what I thought was a really grassroots effort on data literacy. Wow. Like, no joke, we've got 3,000 plus folks trained on Data Literacy 101. We've got an organic growth right now of what 201 looks like, right? Whether it's cyber COE or the intelligence COE, folks are now going out there and starting to bring this into the schoolhouse to kind of normalize that across the force. I think that's a really big deal. We talk a lot about kind of top down, we're going to do this data literacy thing, but this really has been across the force. A grassroots effort to get out there and really getting folks trained with a lot of support from a lot of folks out in industry on this. But what's really driving that is these platforms, right? And having them democratized and folks realizing, hey, I can go build this. And I think we're going to continue to see that happen in this space. But I think the data piece right now and really shaping that guidance moving forward is going to be really important. I do want to bookend something Young said because I think it's important on the process piece. So a lot of great work, right? Moving to SWAP, we got the 11 programs, we've been doing these pilots. I think DCO, right, that defensive cyber operations work that we did really showed that we can go from requirements all the way through testing and reimagine the way we do all this work. I think on the business system side, we're seeing kind of the first shot on rewickering that requirements process, right? So as we take BCAC and turn it to more SWAP-like, we're going to take this very industrial age process of requirements and focus around kind of capability need statements. Let's start talking about what folks really need with the user and start building out those requirements that way versus a more traditional 18, 24 month, we're going to go through this long journey to figure out what we want to buy. So that'll be the first shot. And then on the other side of that is the work that ATEC right now is doing to really up the game and start talking about how do we plug into whether it be a CI/CD pipeline or into what's actually getting developed at the development level and do our testing there. So for the software nerds out there, right, like let's do unit testing and that's part of the way we do business, right? If we can automate it, test what a user experiences and that's going to get us to passing OT, let's go do that. I think ATEC's doing a lot of good work. So it's important to realize that, and it goes back to focusing on the enablers, right? So 6 years of a long journey on pilots, and now it's like, how do we build up these enablers to kind of scale this across the entire life cycle of whether it be a software program or any program that we're delivering to the Army. So a lot of great work being done. I did want to bookend that to let folks know we're working this across the board. It's just all at different levels of maturity right now. Does that answer your question, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So, Mr. Bang, we just put out our third RFI to industry on the Unified Data Reference Architecture. Can you talk a little bit about how the UDRA will enable us to become data-centric?
Yeah, so I'm going to hit on a couple points that Karen and Leo had made, right? So over the course of time, if you step back and look at our journey of how we got there, we did a lot of great things with industry, and we actually vertically integrated things for multiple reasons. Requirements, speed, efficiencies. We needed capabilities to go to our warfighters faster for whatever reason, and that's all a good thing. So don't get me wrong, those things are also part of our architecture. But unintentionally, what happened was that we locked in our data in those stovepipes, right? We always joke that Intel has a lot of compartmentalized things for intelligence reasons. In the Army, we have a lot of stovepipe systems that are vertically integrated, and the hard part is really liberating that data, right? And so the real effort around the UDRA and the data mesh is really changing that paradigm. while in some scenarios you might want to have a vertically integrated stack for whatever reason, like speed efficiencies, we've gotten and over-rotated too much that way. And so what we're trying to do is, how do we get at an architectural approach of simplifying and flattening this complexity that we have in our architecture, right? Whether it's transport, whether it's data, whether it's all these systems, it's just become too complex because what does the Army do? We throw more money and more systems in the problem, right? Versus like the Marines, I'm going to give a nod to the Marines, they actually look at TTPs because they don't have all the money because the Navy holds it. But they're forced to look at processes differently, right, instead of throwing more money. And the reason I want to highlight that is when we throw more systems into it, we're increasing our technical debt, right? And if we increase our technical debt, we're never going to be able to get to our target systems or spend money for that. And we're still stuck with the data that is unintentionally trapped. And so the notion of the data mesh is really looking at how do we actually get to data liquidity? How do we abstract out the data from proprietary systems that have been vertically integrated for multiple reasons, and how do we make that available to the enterprise, or available to the war fighter, or more importantly, available to the commander? And in this scenario, are we saying we want all the data available to the commander? No, right? And so I'm going to give a nod to General Beagle. He coined the term data diet. We got to get to the mindset of changing the way that we look at data differently, right? And the commander doesn't need all the data, but the commander needs the insights from the data that their staff is going to provide so he or she can make that decision. So we're not saying get all the data out there and expose it in just an ocean of data that we can't make sense out of, right? But it's the notion of how do we actually look at decentralizing this architecture, right? Because the Army, unlike the Air Force and Navy, we're going to be disconnected. Our soldiers typically do not have the robust bandwidth that our strategic assets and partners have, right? So we have to be decentralized. We have to work in a disconnected manner, and when we're connected, we have to be able to take advantage of all the bandwidth compute storage that's out there. And for us, decentralized architecture is par for the course. We have to think that way versus a completely centralized architecture. And the data mesh really enables, right, simplifying but also decentralizing, right? We're not trying to replicate data everywhere at every echelon, again, because the commander doesn't need it all. They need to know the most relevant information for them to make the best informed decision to execute the battle, right? To be decisive in battle. And that doesn't mean all the data that's out there to do analysis paralysis. It's this is the most germane for the mission, this is what I need to know, and these are my courses of action. And to get there, it's about decentralization, it's about data products, it's about distributed query, it's about data product orchestration on the fly. It's about consumability and perishability of the data and figuring out how to simplify that. And so the third RFI is really about industry giving us more feedback. Again, I think we've been pretty open and transparent with industry of where we're going with this whole data mesh. We need more of that feedback, but we want you to understand the same thing. This is a architectural as much as it is a mind shift change because the Army has to be decentralized, and we need you all to help us think about that. The other way that I think that we're really driving at that is that we're close to finishing up the innovation lab, and that's really, when you think about it, you've seen our RFIs out there, you've seen our digital models. This will be a reference implementation, not the only implementation, but a reference implementation of the data mesh with data products. So y'all vendors can come in, plug in, and help us refine how this architecture needs to work. And we're going to refine not just the reference architecture, but we're going to refine our guiding principles and design patterns based on industry feedback, right? So that's the intent. Once that's complete, we're going to ensure that all of these are really permeated throughout our PEOs and PMs so that we can really drive that. But really, this enables y'all to kind of plug and play into the architecture, consume, artifacts, orchestrate data products on the fly, really to enable our commanders better.
Can I just add one point,
Absolutely.
Jen? And I know I want to get Margie into this conversation. I know she has a lot to add. Just to build on what Young said. So I think that our data has been siloed not just by the development of prior systems, but also the way the Army is set up. We're a collection of families and communities on the functional side that have their own independent priorities, mission threads, systems that they've developed, but most importantly, their own standards for how they've done it, and different levels of maturity. I think the Intel community got way out ahead of everybody else. You've got log, you've got installations, other warfighter mission area data, and what we're trying to do with the data mesh is to establish kind of a common baseline and a democratized approach to be able to get everybody to a minimum level so that we can do kind of the integration that's needed at that level across the Army. So I think it's really helpful from that perspective.
Yes, sir, thank you. I think that's really well said. And first of all, I want to thank industry as well, because this is our third RFI. We've had two. We've gotten fantastic feedback from industry. And by that, I don't mean it was all positive. We asked for critical feedback, and you gave that to us. And that's what we want, because when you look at RFI 3 with the updated architecture, you can see how much we took from the responses from RFI 2 to update the architecture and to evolve it. And really, we're doing all of that because we want to make sure it's executable, that when we start saying, hey, we have to comply with this, that industry is going to have solutions and be able to help us to do that. The Innovation Exchange that Mr. Bang teed up, so that is a partnership that we've established with DevCom, C5ISR Center out of APG. And it will soon, I would say, let's say first quarter calendar year 24, be a place where industry can come to test your solution against the implementation that we've developed. So that will allow you to get some feedback, and then you're going to make business decisions based on what makes sense for you. But it will give you some idea of, are you fully compliant? Are there a couple of things you need to tweak? Are there a lot of things you would need to tweak, et cetera? So we're very excited about that, and we'll continue to message that. And finally, we do have our UDRA Industry Day today and tomorrow here at AUSA. We had to move it from last week because of the impending shutdown, so we were able to align to do it here. So hope to see you guys there. Okay, Ms. Palmieri. So I know that CDAO is doing a lot of experimentation in a lot of different areas. So can you talk a little bit about how can we use experimentation to get after some of these things that we're talking about with data centricity, and what are some factors that we need to consider in order to be effective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the under said when we started, a lot of this isn't about the technology. It's really about the process and how we use the technology in our workflows. And so what we've found, across the board from the years of kind of doing digital transformation inside of DoD is the workflow, how the user interacts with the information matters for adoption. And so you can put the best tech in front of a user. We've run an experiment series called GUIDE, or Global Information Dominance Experiment series. Every 90 days, we work across the combatant commands with the joint staff and with the joint task forces and then the services to look at how information data flows across organizations and across echelons. And the focus of our effort is really to figure out how we unlock the data, as we've talked about, and allow the diversity of the functional managers, the diversity of the missions, the diversity of the organizations and institutions and cloud or non-cloud environments all interact together. We have a saying inside of CDAO, which is embrace the heterogeneity of the department. We're the largest and most diverse organization probably in the world, and that is our asset. That is an asset to us, and we do not think that there's a one-size-fits-all to this problem. But we do know that users are going after pretty much the same data when they're making decisions, and that data has to be interoperable. So when we run an experiment, we look at how information or data is transformed across one application to another, how different users in the J2 Intel community, J3 Ops community, J4 Logistics community, J5 Planning community come together and start to use that information in different ways, and how we make sure that as the information transits from one user to the other, the points of interest of that of the data that they're working on, let's say it's an object, they're interested in tracking an object. what you want to know from an intel perspective, different from an operation perspective, from a logistics feasibility assessment perspective, that object has to be the same object across all of those different users. So we're doing a lot of work on ontologies and how we think about that from a joint perspective. We're also, in some of our work, working with Google on APIs and really unlocking our data out of its silos there. And the experiments allow us to see how does it really work. When we actually put it into a J2 workflow, or when we actually have to go from a very time-sensitive indications and warning to a COA course of action development, to logistics feasibility assessment, and then up to the chairman or the SecDef for decision making, does the information actually flow in the way we expected? And a lot of times, actually I'll say in the 3 experiments we've done so far this year, we've always found something that didn't quite work the way we expected. Sometimes it's around, no offense Leo, but sometimes it's around the security or the cross-domain pieces associated with it on the CIO side. Sometimes it's because of a configuration challenge. We see one thing in one database one way and another thing in another, and we didn't realize we had the right handshake. Most importantly, though, the users are getting to interact with data in a different way. We just held a tabletop experiment with the Joint Staff, the School for Advanced Warfighting, and some of the combatant commands around how to do cross-COCOM planning. This was something that we've done in crisis before, but didn't have mature TTPs. And now through this tabletop and through the experimentation that we're doing, we're putting in place the TTPs necessary to do this on a more routine basis. And that's the really exciting part, when you actually get to see that users are saying, wow, I have new information at my disposal. I can interact with my colleagues or with my boss in a different way, and they really want to put that into practice. That's the energizing piece and where we really see the mission value come out.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, cross-Army is hard. Cross-COCOM must be really, really hard. But that's fantastic that you're taking that on, because I think it's really critical. So data is important. I think we've established that, and data centricity is critical to be able to enable our success. What really, really we need to get to as well is really the insights from that data that really empower our soldiers. So, Mr. Bang, I'll start with you. What are we doing to build confidence for our soldiers that they can trust the model?
Yeah, that's a great tee up. Thank you. I think some of y'all have already heard about this little thing called Project Lynchpin. And that's an effort that the Army is really driving, actually with the CDAO, and in cooperation with the Intel community, to really look at how do we scale AI, right? Margie hit on it. To get at AI, we really need trust in our data. We need to make sense of our data. And so what we're working on is really creating an infrastructure, loosely term, but really looking at how do we create an environment where we can trust the data, we can trust the models, we can trust the ability for soldiers, for other programs to reach into an environment where they can extend and re-leverage what's been done. And so our intent in Project Lynchpin is not to rebuild anything, right? It's to leverage what's been already there, what's been established, to make the connections, to make it a broader, secure environment, one, to develop really open API so we can actually ensure that one outcome of a project or a process or a phase or any system can be consumed in the next portion of that, right? Everyone talks about it, whether it's ML ops or AI ops, and people are actually starting to vertically integrate. And our whole position is that the Army is not going to be better than industry at this. We're not. We want to leverage what you all bring to the table, right? And again, plug and play your solutions into this trusted environment with our trusted models, with our trusted data, so then people can consume those, but more importantly, so our PEOs, our COCOMs, our warfighters can extend those models, right? Because we all know models are purpose-built, right? They're pretty, what's the right word? Pretty
distinct.
Bespoke for a specific data set or a specific mission. But we want the ability for everybody to consume libraries of these that are trusted, but then really tailor, retrain them, whatever we need to do at the edge to ensure that we can actually fit the mission, right? So A lot of these algorithms are general purpose, right? The intent is for us to re-leverage everything that's there so we're not actually starting over from scratch, so we can get the scale and the speed at the enterprise level in the Army and the DoD so we can compete with our pacing threat.
Excellent, thank you. So, Ms. Palmieri, what enablers do you think are necessary for really larger scale AI adoption?
Yeah, we talked a lot in the beginning of the panel around software and how the DoD is just kind of coming into its own with software. AI takes it to the next level. And I think a lot of times we think, oh yeah, we want AI in there. And in the areas where we actually have fielded AI in supportive operations, there's an entire ecosystem that comes with it. So first of all, in terms of spending, there's probably at least 50% of the cost on the cloud compute, on data labeling, on the pipeline to just develop the algorithms, train them, and understand how well they work. And Young talked about it. AI is still use case driven. Even though we have kind of this aspiration for general purpose AI, when it really comes to being able to make an impact, it is tailored to the use case. And so our users have to know how much confidence they can have in a given AI capability. We do this today with every capability we deploy. We understand the piece of the PK on all the weapons that we deploy and what the likelihood is of it hitting the target. We have to understand the likelihood of an AI on guessing or predicting, I should say, the confidence in what it's going to say to the user. And so when that happens, we need a couple things. The first is labeled data. And this is something that we want to avoid a JADC2 of AI problem in the future, where we've developed all these really capable systems or AI capabilities, but they're not interoperable because we've all labeled the data differently across the services or across different functions. Back to the conversation on ontologies and why we have to understand how users use it differently. So we have an effort inside of CDAO called AI/ML scaffolding, which is the pieces that are going to enable AI to come together for the department. Number one is data labeling and making sure that we can amass a set of data properly labeled across the services so that systems can be interoperable together and we can start to build those models at scale. The next one is test and evaluation. When we do test and evaluation on a capability, we can understand what it's good at, what it's not good at, and then we can train our users on how to use it for a use case. Just because it works on one use case doesn't mean you can automatically swing it to another and get the same levels of confidence. And we also know that AI learns from history and it learns from current events and the environment as it goes forward. One of the most famous quotes in warfare, right? Everything's good until it survives first contact with the enemy. And we know that the environment in warfare is going to change as soon as we come into conflict. And so what we've trained an AI algorithm on in the past is not necessarily what it's going to see going forward. A tank looks a lot different whole versus blown up. And so the confidence levels will change as the algorithms interact with their environment. And our users have to understand that. And when we've deployed AI in the past, we incorporate those in the deployment of that algorithm. So our users can interact and see, okay, the confidence level's changing. They can reaffirm whether or not the AI got it right or not, so they can train it in real time. And then there are triggers in the system that when your confidence drops below a certain amount, that algorithm has to go back to the development environment and to get a second look and maybe get retrained or maybe take another turn on what that looks like. And so that third aspect, so test and evaluation is key to that, and then model monitoring throughout the life cycle of the AI is key. And so we have this kind of sustainment pipeline for our industrial systems. There's a sustainment pipeline for AI as well, and that's going to have to be baked in. There's not going to be that traditional curve of ramp up in RDT&E and then decrease over time. You're going to have that steady amount of funding and interest and interaction between the users and these algorithms as we go. So those are the pieces that we're looking at putting together inside of CDAO with Project Linchpin and the Army, and making sure that our users know exactly what they're interacting with and how to use it.
Can I just add one more point to that? So I agree with everything Margie has said, 1,000%. And I would just say that that's what makes this job so much fun. In order for us to succeed, it's really going to take the department's leadership, and I think across the DoD leadership, you have it right now, a determined focus to ensure that you have things like data governance handled correctly. And that just means, not just tagging the data, but ensuring that it's authoritative. Because you can process a lot of data that's not very good, and you have errors, and then you're still going to have to deal with those errors. understanding what are the high priority use cases, as Margie said. It's different. If you're looking at a COCOM headquarters, vice a division command headquarters, what information they're going to need for what specific mission thread. It varies. So we've got to do that hard work of prioritizing it. We've got to ensure that across all the functional communities in the Army, we have a common way of tagging, governing, and ensuring that the data is accurate. Once we do that, then I think we'll be able to kind of really start humming and rolling. I think we're getting some really good progress, but I think when I get a lot of questions like, okay, so what is the Army doing to issue an RFP that will make AI adoption, super easy to do tomorrow? Or why isn't the Army buying something for JADC2? This is why, because we have to do this foundational work first in order to make it effective. Going straight to the RFP first wouldn't necessarily get us where we want to go. So I just wanted to add that.
I do want to jump on the scaffolding thing, right? I think, and I love that term because it makes so much sense to me, and though I would love to sit and talk about AI machine learning for the next hour, I think the foundation piece, right? So we talk linchpin. Linchpin is possible because CDAO has built a foundation that allows industry to come in and work in there in a secure fashion. So let's think about this operationally now, right? And this really gets to kind of that unified network approach. If we want to talk about security, we want to talk how we fix our CDS, thanks for that dig, issues across the enterprise. Some of this is an understanding that at the most basic level of how we deliver capabilities, services, and data, that there's a unified secure network and that it's flat. That we're not in an environment of silos after silos of network that we have to defend differently. I think that's really important, right? And as you go up that stack, let's take it to the next level, right? Platforms that are also secure that we trust. Because I don't care how good an algorithm is, if you don't trust the platform and you don't trust the network, do you trust the output of that algorithm? I think the answer is no to that, and we would all agree with that. I think that's a big piece of where we're moving right now, and as you look at the next couple of years, it really is about maturing that foundation. And I think Karen had a great point, right? I think our journey's been pretty interesting in cloud, right? We ran real fast, but as you look at the landscape today, right, we've got most of the major CSPs that we're operating either learning or in a production level right now. But that next step, right, is how do we flatten that across the board? Not just the on-prem network, but also cloud. To me, that's all one thing, right? It's one pane that we're looking at. And I had one more piece because we always bounce around the security part, which makes guys like me very nervous. I think that's a big piece to all this, right? Lots of great focus on getting outcomes and getting outputs that we need, but how secure is the algorithmic work we're doing? Right? Who are the third parties that are contributing to some of the open source software that we're looking at? How are we looking at that across the enterprise to make sure that just the base core services we're delivering, right, to leverage some of these capabilities make sense and it's secure and we can understand if there's a challenge, how to get after it. So I think that's really important. And I'm glad that we always dance around it because we all want to talk about the cool stuff up here. But this foundational piece, the next couple of years, right, as we look at kind of delivering the unified network is going to be the real key piece that lays that foundation. I'll add one more on the platform side because I get excited about this. So definitely we've talked a little bit and we touched on it, and I know that the ASOL folks had a great panel on CI/CD yesterday, I believe, or is that
tomorrow?
That's tomorrow. But let's talk about that, right? Not one size fits all. Another great environment. Or I know Margie and I were battle buddies a couple of years ago in this space, where we delivered kind of the first enterprise service, and as I look across the Army now, it's really having some great success where we're delivering a lot more enterprise-level CI/CD tools, right? And we're doing it in a little bit a different way and thinking about this not just like, hey, organically we're going to deliver this to all our DIB partners. I think looking at this differently and saying there's multiple models that we can have kind of CI/CD enable us, whether it be kind of that straight COCO model, and that's a model and it's real, right? Or whether it be kind of a more of a shared approach where we have, right, kind of government-owned, contractor-operated, and then there's a straight government-owned piece. And I think we're doing all those models right now across the enterprise, and we're being successful at getting capability out, and we'll continue to kind of shape that over the next couple of years to kind of figure out what that foundation looks like long-term, because I think there's space for everyone, and I think there's different models for what we're trying to deliver. So I would keep that in the back of my mind, like, as you come in and we have this conversation, whether it be on an RFP for UDRA or some of our other capabilities, is are there some options that look a little different than, hey, we're just going to GFI all this stuff to industry? Because I don't necessarily think that's right all the time.
Yeah, I want to add on to that too. I mean, I think the foundational pieces are table stakes, and we're addressing that as well, right? I think the part that Leo hit on, security. Security, y'all want to know what keeps me up? Security keeps me up when it comes to algorithmic warfare, right? And so ASALT is working with our community to figure out how do we look at algorithms from a risk perspective, right? Beyond just the testing evaluation, right? From a performance, drift, those type of things, right? We're thinking things like a baseball card for algorithms, right? The basics, what's the intended use, what's the hyperparameters, maybe not, but what's the performance of those type of things? We want to understand those so then we can really then focus on the risk dimensions. And when I say risk dimensions, right, we already know that Trojans and triggers are hard to find in software, exponentially harder in algorithms, right? So data has to be foundational and secure. Poison data sets, table stakes, right? We're trying to think through, and I visualize a upside down triangle, having levels of security that we're going through from a risk perspective, right? We're not going to say that we're going to take away all risk from algorithms, but we want to establish this framework so we can actually adopt third-party algorithms faster. We just want to understand, right, like any commander, what are the risks, and the commanders will make the risk-based decisions, just like businesses make risk-based decisions all the time. And so we're trying to create a framework to enable us, based on use case, hey, if it's a mission system, right, that touches the warfighter, it'll probably go through all the different levels of the risks, right? But if it's maybe more of a back office business system, maybe it goes to the first 3 levels, right? But without us creating a framework for y'all to plug into, right, to tell us and us decide where the risks are around the algorithms, it's hard for us to adopt your algorithms right off the bat, right? So coupled with the foundational table stakes pieces around the data, the transport, and those type of things, we are fundamentally looking at risk a little bit differently so we can accelerate us adopting and consuming your algorithms, but you have to help us in that journey as well.
I have to jump in here.
Well, the next question was yours anyway, so go for it.
Come to me, so I'll jump in without the question. And I'll play a bit of devil's advocate for the panel. DoD is no different than any other Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company. You worry about risk, you worry about your data, you worry about security, you worry about how it's going to affect the end product. I think we tend, inside of the department, to think too long and hard about these experimental technologies. And that prevents us from pervasively deploying them and really enabling the warfighter in a different way. And so I'll give you some examples. We work today on generative AI and AI in general in 8 of the 10 largest healthcare systems in the country. There's no more protected data than PHI and PII. We protect it, we know how to do it. We know how to run both generative models as well as foundational models against a PHI data set. It's not hard to do. We know how to do it without making that data available, in the wild, which I know is something we worry deeply about. We work for a huge number of large consumer companies, and I'll just give you one, Mercedes-Benz, whose algorithms around how they manufacture and develop their systems in a car are highly proprietary. We do generative AI models for them. What they've all done, and I think this is the lesson we need to learn, what they've all done is they just get started. These are not experimental technologies. These are technologies that are being used broadly across many different industry sets. And while I know the defense of the nation and the defense of our intelligence information is absolutely critical, these technologies can be applied. So you need to move to a zero trust architecture, which I know is sort of high on your list, which means identity and access. We've got to get there. We've got to stop talking about it. We've got to move to identity and access as a key enabler to zero trust. We've got to start talking about AI models and developing specific use cases. Let's just get on about developing the use cases. We know that AI can be used to synthesize, to conversationalize, to automate. These are the tools that we need to apply. Apply them in your least friction environments to start. Learn how to do this. The T in GPT stands for the transformer model, which is Google's open-sourced transformer model, which allows machines to learn without human intervention. It can be used in data labeling. It can be used to help understand the data that you're trying to sort of collect and organize. So I think, my push for us, for the department, former Navy officer, so I get the mission, is to really move with pace and move forward with real use cases and demonstrating the power of the technology, because right now we're talking a lot about risk and the things that need to be done to get there, and we just need to move because our adversaries are moving quickly. I'll pause there.
And who wants to go first? I'm with you, Karen. I think just looking across the board, I think there's a lot of great examples where we're just doing it. I think it's that next step, right? So it's scale, right? So scale matters, right, in every one of these problems. And I think the other one, which we touched on really lightly, it's things like, from a technology perspective, we, the Army, could deploy ICAM today 100% across the entire Army. That is a thing. Technically, can be done. Now, do we have the ConOps, TTPs, and SOPs to do all the attribute work to get at some of the problems? I think that's the challenge, and that's where we can use a lot of help from industry, right? Like if somebody's already figured out the medical stuff and the TTPs, I'm ready to forklift today, right? The technology part's easy, right? It's working through the attributes. As we look at even our business systems, right? That disambiguation between a financial person who has access to finance data and a system administrator should be an easy thing to do, right? But that would mean that we have a ConOp at the attribute level.
That's identity.
Right, 100%, right? And it starts with identity. I think that's where we're looking at when we talk about risk. I think we look at it more from, like, are we there from a ConOp to scale operationally, right? Because I think when I look at all the pilots, we're doing a lot of this stuff in a really good way. It's really that next step, right? And that next step, too, is not just, hey, we got to change our TTP and SOP. It's fundamentally changing culture and the way that the Army operates, right? I think that's what we're seeing right now is kind of like that friction that we have and that healthy friction. But I think where industry can really help, and when I meet with almost every DIB partner, the first thing I say is, hey, that's great, love your sales folks. Can I meet with your CIO? Because I want to know exactly how you're doing cloud. I want to understand how you're doing DSO. That's where I need help. We got the tech. The tech's kind of easy, right? We got how to even secure the tech. That's actually kind of easy too. It's how do you operationalize it, and that next step where we need a lot of help. So concur with your assessment because I see it every day. I think this also changes the business model, right? Our relationship historically with our DIB partners has really been about bringing technology to bear. I think now we're asking not just the technology piece, but that rest of that .ml PFP, the part that's not exciting to everyone. It's not shiny. I can't put it on a nice slide deck, right? It's kind of that hard work friction piece. So that's where I'm excited with partnering with folks on right now is how do we get at that next step to accelerate that space? Because that's the space that's kind of always holding us back a little bit.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, Leo, your assessment's right. DoD doesn't have an innovation problem. We have an innovation adoption problem. We have 160 use cases for LLMs inside of Task Force Lima, an effort we just kicked off, had an industry day for last week, where we know we want to use large language models, but have to go get the data and have to take a look at the security and have to take a look at the confidence and really how do you get it over that valley of death. Same thing, CDAO did a review of all the budget books for the department, used an NLP to do it, which was great. But it told us the DoD has about 1,000 different AI projects currently underway in various stages across the department. But when we see fielding of those capabilities, it's only a fraction of that. And so it's really this, how do you get it over transition through the valley of death? And it's all these underlying pieces that we've got to get right, which is why the Army's...
Can I comment on that, Margie? And I know Young was trying to get into. Here's what we see from industry, and I just want to comment on this and get your reaction to it. We hear all of this and agree that, in sort of non-operational environments, it's all super important. And then a crisis happens, withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Ukrainian war, what happened this weekend. And we get calls to immediately deploy our technology now. And so there is this disconnect between, yes, we have to do all the planning and the work that you and Leo mentioned and get to perfection, maybe not perfection, that's too critical, but near, sort of 70, 80% confidence. But in the midst of crisis, we get called in to bring in these technologies that are, open source, used by billions of users across the world to help solve for some of these things. So how do you balance this need to do the scaled prototypes, get prototype to scale, versus what you need today in theater to deliver on the promise of these technologies?
Yeah, if I can talk about experimentation again. So a lot of times the DoD has segmented experimentation, so it's this separate thing as apart from operations. And what we're trying to do in Guide, and I think PCC4 that's coming up as well, Project Convergence, has been looking at this as well, is how do you actually use experimentation to mature and deliver capabilities? And so through Guide, we are fielding new data connections, new algorithms, and new ways to look at information while we're doing the experiment. Because we create this manufactured crisis every 90 days that says, hey, we're going to do this experiment. Are you ready to go or not? And let's hook this up and actually see where the barriers are. And we find, whether it's an ATO or whether it's a, lack of interoperability between, different functional software. And we can fix those things in a lot of cases, not the ATO piece, but the
Please fix the ATO piece.
I'm working on it.
It's over there. But we can fix a lot of the other pieces around interoperability pretty quickly, and then that gives us those lessons. And then that's a stay behind for the user. It's part of the software. It's maintained as part of the package that they've already paid for. And so I think if we can think differently about experimentation, I think someone said it before, how can we OT through experimentation, get that operational test, get that ability to field changes, and do that very quickly and rapidly and not wait for a crisis and not have to go through the normal process. I think DoD's, that's that culture change piece that Leo talked about, where we're trying to work through, how do we get our underlying processes, kind of CTPs, as well as users interact with it. So it's much more a matter of how we do business as opposed to the traditional way that's a little bit slower.
Yeah, I don't think it's a binary step, right? I mean, you're given the impression it's binary. I think Margie hit it. We're doing over 1,000 AI projects already, right? We were one of the first Army, combined with Joint, to do the first usage of generative AI, right? We actually created the vaccine for Corona, right? By looking at how, using generative AI to look at how molecules actually attach to, and for countermeasures, and how do we actually accelerate that speed, and using generative AI to look at all the different effects and all the different combinations to make sure the bonding is optimized. And that's how literally the US and the Army, right, created the virus for Corona when none of the previous vaccines for Corona, for COVID actually worked on that, right? So I think the point is, you're right, we are doing all those things, but we can't forget the processes to look at the risk. To your point, when things are called in from an operational perspective to say, hey, we need the technology now, we're saying, absolutely. We want to enable the commanders to make those decisions, but it's a risk-based decision. Just like on the commercial side, if you want to monetize a product, right, you want to be first to market, but do I have a business model around revenue and those type of things? Sure, maybe, maybe not, but you want to be first to market, great. You're making a risk-based decision. So all we're saying is, hey, we want to enable the adoption of technology, right? It's not a binary thing. We're doing experimentation. We're actually maturing things and processes along the way, but ultimately to enable warfighters and commanders to make that decision, right? I'm going to make a risk-based decision. I understand the pitfalls of this type of thing, but for this scenario, I'm going to take that risk and I'm going to employ these technologies so I can actually do my mission. So I think it's yes and in that scenario.
Yeah, thank you. That was.
Can I
Sorry, did you want?
Well, I do. I just can't help myself, so I'm going to jump in as well. So I think, to your point, which is excellent, what is the end state we're marching towards? The end state, as I see it, isn't a condition in which the Army takes one use case and scales that out to the entire force. It is to create the conditions that when any crisis hits, another Ukraine, what happened this weekend, another pandemic, we have the conditions set to be able to call up whoever is best and say, help us, and to be able to do that. And I think that's what the point of the conversation, at least to me, has been up to this point, focused on. How do we create conditions to maximize that success? So if we have an innovation adoption problem, part of our way to get over that hump is to reconcile what is very mainstream technology with the way that we do business. So that's why we have to do the things that Leo and Young and Margie are talking about. That is how we ingest that into our DNA. But I think success in that area enables us to be able to envision a future in which software is something we can very quickly develop with the best of breed vendors or AI products without the need to have to figure out, okay, how are we going to use this? But I do think we do that very well today. I think we accept risks when we need to. Now the question is, what does the end state look like? It's not the scaling out of that one piece of software or that one AI tool. It is the conditions in the future to enable us to go and replicate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, so...
That was an easy topic.
Yes, it was. So digital engineering has a lot of power, right? It offers a tremendous amount of power to organizations, allows them to rapidly and iteratively develop and design their products, and also be able to determine quickly the impact of changes in a digital way where you don't have to bend metal. Makes test and sustainment much more simplified than it is today. So Honorable Camarillo, can you talk about what the Army is doing with regard to digital engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know a lot about it, Jen, because you've been helping me with it, as has the rest of the team here. First of all, DE and digital engineering is another buzzword. It can mean a lot of different things to different people. Full-scale digital twins that enable us to rapidly iterate on software, all the way to how do I have cloud-based tools that allow me to share CAD files across different users. Very, very different things across the spectrum. The important thing is that the Army has to take some decisive steps towards beginning its more broad adoption of digital engineering capabilities. And why do we want to do that? I mean, I think the lessons why are obvious to many in this room, but they deserve a little bit of an underscore. First and foremost, we are modernizing the Army in a fundamental way, and we're looking at what General George, our new chief, has talked about in terms of continuous transformation. That means that we want to make sure we maximize our investment dollars to provide the best capabilities against the threat that continues to evolve very quickly and very rapidly. What else can help us do that more effectively than a digital engineering capability that allows us to do everything from identifying trade-offs in system requirements without the need for developing full-up prototypes, the ability to represent a system's characteristics in a virtual environment to be able to understand what are the cost drivers, and then again to assess it in a very sophisticated DE environment to understand what are the performance risks. There's a million reasons we have to do it, and I think again we're a late adopter. The commercial sector is already there. That is how new cars are designed, developed, and manufactured, with a lot of these tools in place today. So I think the Army has taken some steps in this direction. We have done this with the XM30 program by having digital artifacts and digital engineering from all of the vendors in that particular program of record. There are a couple of other examples where we've adopted more DE tools. I think on the Future Vertical Lift programs, those are a couple other examples. But when I came into the role, I said, how do we take some more decisive steps to move forward on it? And Jen and I, we had a conversation with Young, and what are the barriers that are there? We know that workforce familiarity is one. We know that there's a multitude of DE tools out there that are being used by the private sector and by our program managers, and they vary by commodity. So if you're in combat vehicles versus aviation, it's a very different familiarity with different types of tools. So when we had this conversation, a couple things came out. We've got to upskill our workforce. We've got to get them trained to be able to do this. We know that the tools that are out there, it would be wrong for us to pick one or two and then have everybody in the Army use it. That's probably what we would have done like 20 years ago. That just would not work today. And we need to make sure we're working with the vendors that are developing and designing these tools to describe what our standards are, like what do we need. So as they iterate it over time, they'll iterate with us and they'll evolve to kind of incorporate what capabilities we need to have. So we're working on another policy that will essentially kind of formalize our path to do this, and Jen has been really helping me with this. We've done a lot of market research. We've talked to a lot of industry. We've learned what teams are doing, and I'll say that there's a couple of different elements to it. The first is we have to come up with a list of programs that will be kind of our pathfinders beyond just XM30 and future vertical lift to be able to showcase what adoption of this would mean. I think we need to be serious about upskilling our workforce. And that means not just providing training opportunities on what digital engineering and those ecosystems entail, but I think it's also helping them understand essentially how to use those tools, not just in the program side, but on test evaluation, the requirements, everybody that touches an acquisition program. So I think that's a key part of it as well. And then, of course, it's understanding what the data is, and again, data governance as it relates to how we're using those ecosystems and these tools. How are we going to manage the data? How are we going to make sure that it's authoritative? And there's a lot of policy changes that go with it. So I'm excited. We'll be putting that out here, I think, in the near term, so stay tuned. But it is kind of a way for us to take the next big step to enable it. One of the things that we realize is that we probably need to create what I call centers of excellence in a couple of different commodity areas so that we don't create one approach for the entire Army. As I said, it's very different in aviation, Vice ground systems, Vice intel systems and sensors. They all have very different needs and requirements. For example, those are just three as it relates to digital engineering. So we're looking to come up with a tailored approach as we move forward on it.
Sir, thank you. That was a great summary of what we're doing. And we do have our digital engineering panel this afternoon, so we'll talk a little bit more about what you said in a little bit more detail. So the last topic that we wanted to cover this morning was workforce, and you teased it out just now, sir, with regard to digital engineering, but I mean, across the digital transformation space, there is clearly a need. Workforce is a huge component of it, and we are doing a lot of upskilling across the Army, but that takes time, and changing culture takes time and some wins. People need to get some reps and sets and see the value. So what are some things, sir, that you can talk about that we're doing to kind of bridge the gap?
I think there's many, and we're making some significant headway, but we've got a ways to go. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a late adoption problem that we spent so much time talking about earlier today. But there's a couple of things. I would say that we do have training with industry programs where we have the opportunity to send some of our developers out to work with companies who can see what right looks like. And I think Google has participated in this in the past, as have many of the other companies that we work with that are here in the audience. I have been pushing, and I think Young and I both have, on how do we expand the scope of those programs and put more people through. Because it can't just be the program managers. You've got to also have contracting personnel, test personnel, people who write system requirements, just to understand how the other side of the equation works. I think that helps. And we are looking to scale that out. The second thing that we need to do, and that's internal to the Army, is to show people internal to the Army what right looks like. So I talked about it a little bit in the case of software. It is finding ways to bring in expertise that is outside the Army to be able to do, whether it's peer reviews of RFPs, advise on system requirements, review kind of test and evaluation strategies, figure out, hey, this is the more expedient way to do it, or actually your RFP is probably not going to get you anything near what you're asking for because you're calling for way too much customization of a commercial piece of software. Sometimes our folks that initiate these efforts, they just haven't had enough experience with it. And so bringing in the expertise in-house in a concerted way, I think is a key way to help upskill our workforce by showing what right looks like. We've taken that approach with intellectual property, which I know is very important to many of you in industry. We're off to the races in terms of hiring sophisticated, experienced IP expertise from the private sector to come in and help advise our contracting teams, our program managers, on really what are the range of options. So, we're not in this binary choice of, not have any access to IP at all versus assume that you're going to buy and assume all of it, which would scare, really the bejesus out of small business. So we don't want that. I mean, there's lots of tailored ways to do it and the wide spectrum in between. So we're hiring that expertise in, and it's going to form kind of a cell of expertise to be able to advise us. I think we can do it in a bunch of other areas that will kind of upskill the workforce as well.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So the last question, Leo, is for you, and it's your favorite topic again, security. So what are you doing to simplify some of those processes to make it easier on the workforce and industry and everybody?
Oh, there's so much going on in this space. I'm so excited. This is my favorite question. So look, part of this has been, so a couple things that were already kind of happening inside the Army, right? So a big move to RMF 2.0. So think about just simplifying the compliance pieces. I think the piece that we're working on right now is actually putting out new guidance that's specific to new technology. So I think that this is where these rubs come, right? Like we're trying to apply a very legacy approach to compliance against new technologies that it's not even apples to another fruit. It's like apples to another planet, right? It's not even the same. So I think it's putting out that initial guidance. So for example, right, one of the ones that we just published recently was a software container policy, right? So it's something that was fundamentally missing inside the Army. So folks were putting very traditional approaches that could probably take months to get done against something that was very simple, right? So how do we put guidance out there to really get the force to understand what that looks like and our cybersecurity folks to do that? I think more importantly is this kind of new approach in thinking the cybersecurity piece that's not wholeheartedly focused on compliance. And I say that, and I do not say that jokingly. I've said it a couple of times. Folks who were at TechNet heard me say it. I've seen folks do $5 million worth of paperwork, and I go and test it, and it is in no way reflective of the security posture of the system. Conversely, I have at least one system where I think they had a piece of paper with a drawing on it that was probably the most secure system I've touched in the Army, right? So that's the disparity that we have in the environment today. So my focus has been on reimagining that, right? So our first shot is we have one program at PEOEIS where we're going to try to do a little bit of a different approach. So very scaled down RMF. We just did this on the Intel side about a year ago, and we're able to get one of the PORs up and running in less than 90 days in production across 2 classified networks. So we're going to try this again now outside of Intel, and we're going to move really fast to scale down that piece, which is about compliance, and focus on the more interesting piece to me, right? That red, purple team approach, get them on those programs early and often, right? And really talk about securing that system and delivering a secure system. I see somebody over here shaking because they lived this with me a couple of months ago. And it works, right? And this really is about kind of getting the entire approach across the network to be really focused on the threat piece and the risks that we're taking by the tools that we deliver. That being said, this really does get back to that kind of laying down that, and I don't want to use the buzzword, but I have to, zero trust kind of framework, right, on the network. So as we look at kind of securing the network as a whole, right, that really is about laying that foundation of security where folks are not worried about trying to figure out how we're doing basic things like incident response, right, which is a bunch of paperwork that gets generated. It's just automated, right? It's a thing that happens just because you live in that space. I think the place where we're having a lot of success right now is really on the cloud side, on really kind of leveraging that kind of approach, that layered cake approach where you have like this foundational level of security that you get to build on top of. So you're not focused on the whole stack every time you put a system on there. But I think what you're going to see over the next couple of months is a lot of pretty hard-hitting guidance and policy, which really starts focusing on us shifting away from this very compliance-heavy approach to really a threat and a risk-based approach where we're going to start slimming down that documentation and really focused on kind of the delivering of secure capability. I'll add one more thing, which is an interesting one, and for our industry partners and folks who've worked on some of the projects that I was the authorizing official of. The other thing is talking about digital artifacts, right? Like right now, compliance is all like somebody wrote a document that's PDF that then gets put into another system, right? I think what we're really talking about now is kind of evolving that. And if you're using X system, which I won't name, to do kind of your workflow and where you're generating like what your system looks like that digital artifact, that's good enough, right? I'm not going to pay anyone or ask anyone to rebuild that in some document that, honestly, are we going to look at it? Probably not. We'll probably forget about it. But that digital representation that's out there, that's a living thing. Right? So that really gets to being able to point at that, and as the system changes and as it it matures, we have this digital representation that we can always be pointing at. That's a good pivot point. But that's a fundamentally different way of doing cybersecurity, right? And a real big shift from this kind of like compliance, build a PDF, write an 80-page document that I am never going to read for sure, and that we're not doing NLP again, so we can't use it. But I think this really is about kind of digitizing the way that we think about cybersecurity. And I'll add one more piece, because I think this is the huge, I have to, because this is the one that gets me the most excited, is really all the work we're doing on really censoring the network, right? Like, we used to talk about things like, hey, we've got Gabriel Nimbus and we're getting all these logs and we're bringing it in. But are we doing analytics against that, right? Are we doing that INW? And this really is censoring our network across the board, and as we flatten that network, to start doing real analytical work to do that indication and warning piece. So we're not stuck in this kind of reactive world that we live in today, but really we're getting out in front of that threat from a digital perspective. I think that's the piece that I'm really excited about. And if you're a business system, you're going to see some guidance coming out. You're not going to smile, but it's all about starting that foundational piece to get that data to be able to start building out some of these analytics. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Very completely. So we do have some questions from the audience, but I was just told, sir, that we're making you late for your next engagement. So
let's do at least one.
Okay. All right, sir. So
give it to Margie.
Well, then I'm going to change the question. Okay. So, Margie, LLMs are powerful but limited. So much of our challenge set requires situational understanding and context. How is digital transformation thinking about knowledge level reasoning and semantically grounded representations for areas like planning?
How do LLMs apply to planning?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, so much of planning is around branches and sequels and what could work and what could not work, and all of that is, benefits from knowledge. It benefits from knowledge that's out there in documents, and it benefits from experiential knowledge. And so I would say planning is one of the areas where we have a lot of ideas, but really need to start doing, as Karen said, get into the practice of this and start applying data to it. All the COCOMs have really interesting ideas, including U.S. Forces Korea, around how we can apply data analytics and AI to planning, and I think it's a really ripe environment to jump in and start to use that. I think it's going to involve a lot of experimentation. We know as students of military history that no single conflict is like any other. It rhymes without a doubt, but every time you walk into a new conflict, there's new circumstances and there's new factors at play. And I think especially in a digital age where there really is no precursor that could fully inform our decision making in an informationized or digitized environment, we're going to need human expertise. And so I think that going forward, whether it's LLMs or it's regular AI, there's always going to be a human responsible for the decision making, for the action that's taking place. That's part of DoD policy right now. And there's always going to be a human that is going to have to figure out how to incorporate AI into their workflow, both from a planning perspective and an execution perspective. And they're going to have that confidence in order to be able to say, I trust this recommendation based off of some understanding of how it works and their own professional judgment. And so I think that's where we're going.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. And we will follow up with the other questions later.
Hey, Jen, can I add to that?
Sure.
I mean, I'd love to actually get industry's perspectives here too, because LLMs are great, but I'd also like to see what industry thinks about small language models and how that could be applied to our planning cycles and that as well. So again, I think that's an area, again, that y'all can come and talk to us and help us think through as well.
Yep. Okay, thanks. So, sir, I will turn it over to you for any closing remarks that you have.
Great. First of all, I want to thank everyone here for being here. It's a really important conversation. I want to thank my fellow panelists, so the two gentlemen on the end and the lady to my right who are brilliant in the Army. See, I threw that in there for you, Jen. They make us all look really good. I hope the takeaway from those of us on the Army side is we are leaning into this problem set. There's a lot of momentum that we have. We have a long way to go, but at least we're defining the challenge, in my view, in a way that's going to help us accelerate our digital transformation. To Margie from OSD and the rest of our OSD teammates and our colleagues across the other services, it really is a team effort, and we're fully aligned. I think, as I said earlier, you've got a cadre of leaders across the department that is really serious about getting after it in a fundamental and permanent way. So, Margie, thank you very much for being here. And then for Karen, just thank you very much for representing a wide, diverse set of views from industry, small and large business alike, on the panel. And I like that you challenged us, and I really do appreciate the perspective that you bring, because we need to hear that. So being the voice of probably many in the room is one that we need to hear. So thank you very much for being here as well. Jen, great job moderating. And let's just say this is not the end of the conversation. So we want to hear from you, as Young said, not just through the typical RFIs and industry engagements, but if you have perspectives, please reach out to us. I'd love to hear from each of you. And thank you all so much for being here today. Thanks to AUSA.
Thank you.
All right.
That's it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Don't forget your gift.
We're going that way. We're going